Ethan Cole had never imagined his life would take him beyond the small cargo ship he worked on. He was just an engineer, the kind of man who spent his days with tools in his hands and grease on his shirt, fixing broken engines and coaxing tired machines back to life. His world was wires, panels, and humming reactor cores. He liked it that way, simple, quiet, predictable. But the galaxy has a way of surprising people. It started when the captain of his freighter, a tall woman named Captain Merrick, called him into her office one evening. She didn't usually summon Ethan unless something was broken, so he was already rehearsing in his head how he'd explain the last repair he'd done on the starboard coolant system. Instead, she handed him a folded piece of parchment. Yes, parchment, not a data screen. The paper smelled faintly of some strange sweet spice. "What's this?" Ethan asked, turning it over in his hands. The writing shimmered faintly, the letters shifting in a way that made him feel like they were alive. "It's an invitation," Captain Marek said, "from the royal court of Aurelia. They're holding a wedding for the king's nephew. The High Council requested that a representative from our crew attend as a gesture of friendship between their people and humanity." Ethan blinked. "So, you're going?" Marek leaned back in her chair, a small smirk tugging at her lips. "No, I'm sending you." He nearly dropped the parchment. "Me? Why me? I'm not a diplomat. I'm not even good at—" He waved vaguely at the air. "This talking, fancy events. That's exactly why," she said. "You're honest. You listen. You won't try to impress anyone. They'll like that." Ethan stared at her, half convinced she was joking. But she wasn't. By the next day, he was packed and on a shuttle bound for Varelia, still wondering what in the stars he was doing. The planet was unlike anything he'd seen before. As the shuttle descended, silver towers rose into the sky, like frozen lightning bolts, their surfaces alive with flowing patterns of light. Floating gardens drifted between them, spilling cascades of flowers into the warm air. Bridges of crystal spanned the spaces between buildings, glowing faintly under the pale gold sun. Ethan pressed his face to the window like a child. For a moment, he forgot his nerves. This place was alive in a way no human city could match. Every structure felt like it had grown rather than been built. When the shuttle touched down at the palace landing platform, he was met by two attendants, dressed in robes that shimmered like the surface of a lake. They bowed in perfect unison and guided him through towering gates, carved with scenes of stars, oceans, and strange winged beasts. Inside, the palace was even more breathtaking. The air was warm and smelled faintly of flowers. Sunlight streamed through colored glass windows, scattering patterns across the marble floor. Servants moved silently, carrying trays of food that looked almost too beautiful to eat. Ethan had expected to feel out of place, and he did. His plain black suit felt dull against the sweeping gowns and flowing robes of the Varelians. The guests all seemed impossibly tall, their features sharp and elegant, their voices like music. Yet no one looked at him with scorn. Many offered polite nods, their eyes curious rather than cold. The wedding ceremony itself was held in a vast hall with a domed ceiling painted to look like a star. The stars shimmered faintly, as if they were moving, as if the whole galaxy hung just above their heads. Rows of guests sat in curved tiers, facing the central platform where the couple would be bound in Varelian tradition. Ethan sat quietly, taking it all in. The music was strange, low and deep, like the rumble of distant thunder, yet soothing. The bride entered first, her gown a waterfall of silver and green. The groom followed, wearing a crown of woven crystal. The king himself presided, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made even the most restless guest fall silent. Ethan thought he'd just watch, clap politely at the right moments, maybe try some alien food afterward. That was his plan. Nothing more. But plans have a way of shattering when destiny decides to step in. Because somewhere in that hall, among the nobles and dignitaries, stood someone who would change everything for him. Someone who would take this ordinary human engineer and turn his life upside down. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know she was the king's daughter. But before the night was over, she would be standing beside him, and he would be married to her. The moment Ethan saw her, the noise of the grand wedding hall seemed to fade. She was standing apart from the crowd, near one of the tall glass windows that looked out over the glowing city. Her gown was silver, but it wasn't like the polished silver of the nobles around her. It was softer, like moonlight reflected on water. Her hair was braided with thin strands of living jewels that pulsed gently with light, as if they were breathing. Someone near Ethan whispered her name, Princess Alira. He didn't react outwardly, but inside he felt an odd pull. There were dozens of beautiful women in the room, but there was something different about her. She wasn't smiling like the others, wasn't leaning in to gossip or laugh. Her eyes, deep, violet, and far too serious for her age, were fixed on something far away, as if she were watching a world only she could see. Ethan tried to look away, to focus on the ceremony, but his gaze kept drifting back to her. There was a loneliness about her that he couldn't ignore. When the formal vows ended, the feast began. The hall transformed tables laden with shimmering dishes, glowing fruits, and bowls of spices that sent warm, strange scents drifting through the air. Laughter rose like a tide, music spilled from the far corner, and the king's guests began to mingle. Ethan had no idea how to mingle in a room like this. He stood awkwardly near the end of a table, sipping something that tasted like sweet fire. He was trying to decide whether to find a quiet corner when a voice spoke behind him. "You're human." He turned. It was her, Princess Alira. Her voice was soft, but not shy. It had a quiet strength, the kind of tone used by someone who rarely wastes words. Up close, she seemed even more striking, not just because of her beauty, but because her presence felt calm, steady, like a still pool of water in a noisy storm. Ethan cleared his throat. "Ah, yes, and you're the princess." "Ah." Faint smile touched her lips, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I am." She glanced around at the crowded hall. "And you are far from your home." He chuckled. "So are you." Her head tilted slightly, curious. "I was born here." "That's not what I mean," Ethan said, surprising himself. "You look like someone who's somewhere else. In your mind, I mean." For the first time, her eyes lit with a flicker of real interest. "And what do you see there?" she asked. "Someone who doesn't really want to be here," he said, honestly. She studied him for a moment, then laughed. It was small, brief like a drop of rain in dry air, but it felt genuine. "You are not like the others," she said. "The men here speak to me as if they are reading from a script." "You do not." Ethan shrugged. "I'm not good at scripts." They ended up talking for hours. She told him about Varelia's strange sky, how it was brighter in winter and dimmer in summer. He told her about Earth's oceans, about how the waves could sound like they were breathing. She spoke of her duties, of how every day was filled with expectations and rules. He spoke of fixing engines, of finding beauty in something broken and making it whole again. Somewhere in the middle of it all, Ethan realized the crowded wedding hall had faded into the background. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, it was all distant. What mattered was the way she looked at him when he spoke, and the way her voice softened when she asked questions. And she asked a lot of questions. "What is the first thing you think of when you wake up? What scares you the most? What is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen?" Ethan answered them all, and then, without thinking, he asked her the same. She hesitated before answering. "The most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she said quietly, "is someone looking at me and seeing me, not the crown I wear." Their eyes met. Ethan didn't know it yet, but in that moment, something had already begun, something neither of them could stop, because from that night on, the human engineer and the alien princess would no longer be strangers. They were already becoming something more, though neither of them knew just how far fate was about to take them. The wedding feast carried on late into the night. The music swelled and softened like the tide, the air thick with the scent of sweet fruits and spiced meats. Ethan found himself drifting from conversation to conversation, but his mind kept returning to Princess Alira, her quiet laugh, her searching questions, and the way she looked like she belonged to a different world, even while standing in the middle of her own palace. He didn't see her again until much later, when the hall had emptied a little. She had been swept away by a circle of noblewomen, each trying to draw her into their chatter. Ethan noticed she kept glancing toward the doors, as if she was thinking of slipping away. He was about to leave himself when one of the royal attendants approached. "The king wishes to speak with you," the man said, bowing slightly. Ethan blinked. "The king? Me?" The attendant didn't answer, only gestured for him to follow. They led him through a wide corridor lined with towering statues of past rulers, their stone eyes watching silently. At the end, great bronze doors swung open, revealing a smaller, more private chamber, lit by tall, flickering lamps. The king of Varelia was there, standing by a long table covered in maps, scrolls, and strange crystal devices. His robes shimmered faintly in the lamplight, and his crown was a simple band of silver. It was his presence, not his ornaments, that marked him as a ruler. "Ethan Cole," the king said, his voice deep and even. "Welcome." Ethan bowed awkwardly. "Your Majesty." The king studied him for a moment. "You have spoken with my daughter tonight." Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir. She's very kind." The king's eyes softened, but only slightly. Kindness is not something she often shows to strangers. She has turned away every suitor I have brought before her. Dukes, warriors, scholars, men of wealth and title. All of them. Ethan shifted, uncomfortably. Maybe she's just waiting for the right person. The king's gaze was steady. "And perhaps she has seen something in you." Ethan almost laughed, but stopped himself. "With respect, sir, I'm not a prince or a noble. I fix broken machines for a living." Perhaps that is why she spoke. "To you," the king said. "You do not look at her and see only the crown." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. It was true, he hadn't thought about her title when they talked. He'd only seen the way her eyes searched for something more. The king walked to the window, looking out at the glowing city. "Alira is my only child. One day she will rule Varelia. She will need a partner who sees her as more than a symbol. Someone who will stand beside her, not above or beneath her." He turned back, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps fate has brought you here for more than a wedding feast." Ethan felt his stomach twist. He wasn't sure if this was a conversation or some kind of test. "I don't think I'm the kind of man you're talking about, sir." The king only gave a small smile, as if he knew something Ethan didn't. "We shall see." When Ethan returned to the hall, the music had slowed to a softer, warmer rhythm. The dance floor was open, and couples moved beneath a canopy of floating lanterns. They weren't ordinary lights. The lanterns pulsed gently, almost like they were alive, casting golden ripples over the dancers. Ethan leaned against a pillar, just watching. The movement of the dancers was hypnotic, each step matching the steady beat of the music. It was peaceful, almost dreamlike. Then he saw Alira again. She stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching the couples with an unreadable expression. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. Dancing wasn't his strength on earth. He'd mostly avoided it entirely. But something in the way she stood there, apart from everyone else, made him take a step forward. He approached her slowly. "Do you want to dance?" She looked at him, and for the first time that night, her smile reached her eyes. Yes. They stepped into the circle of lantern light. The music wrapped around them like a warm breeze. Her hand was light in his, her steps graceful and certain. Ethan followed her lead, letting the moment carry him. Neither of them noticed the way the surrounding guests had begun to watch. Neither of them knew that on Varelia, a dance beneath the wedding lanterns was more than just a dance. It was an unspoken vow or public declaration of intent to join lives. By the time Ethan realized every eye in the hall was on them, it was already too late. The music slowed, and the final notes faded into the warm air. Ethan still had one hand resting lightly on Princess Alira's, the other at her waist. He felt oddly reluctant to let go. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering in the lantern light, and for a brief moment it felt like the rest of the world had fallen away. Then the silence hit him. The hall, which had been buzzing with laughter and chatter moments ago, had gone completely still. Dozens of Varelian faces were turned toward them. The nobles were whispering behind jeweled hands, and the servants stood frozen in place. Even the king, seated on his high silver throne, was watching intently. Ethan's stomach tightened. "Did I step on your foot or something?" he asked in a low voice. Alira's expression changed just slightly. Surprise flickered in her eyes, followed by something he couldn't quite name. "Ethan, do you know what you've just done?" He frowned. "We were just dancing." She took a small step back, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not here. Not under the wedding lanterns." Confusion washed over him. What's so special about the lanterns? Her gaze searched his face, as if looking for some sign he was joking. In Varelian tradition, a dance beneath the wedding lanterns is a public vow. It is how one asks for a joining of lives. Marriage. The word hit him like a physical blow. "Wait, what?" "I know. That's not what I—" Before he could finish, a low murmur swept through the crowd. The king rose from his throne, his silver robes glinting in the golden light. His voice carried across the hall with calm authority. "Engineer Ethan Cole of Earth," the king said, "before the court of Varelia, you have spoken without words the vow of union. Do you stand by this declaration?" Ethan's mouth went dry. "Your Majesty, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," but the crowd didn't look confused. They looked expectant. Some seemed delighted, others curious, but no one doubted what they believed they had just witnessed. Alira stepped closer, her voice urgent, but soft enough only he could hear. "If you wish to withdraw, say so now. I will tell them it was a mistake." Ethan's heart was racing. He hadn't come here looking for romance, much less a royal marriage. He'd been sent as a guest, nothing more. This wasn't his world. He didn't know the customs, the politics, the responsibilities. It would be easy to walk away. But then he looked at her, really looked. She was the most composed person in the room, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of fear, of disappointment, and beneath that, a quiet longing. She had told him earlier she wanted someone who saw her, not the crown. If he backed away now, would she simply return to the endless line of suitors she didn't want? His voice felt strangely steady when he spoke. "What happens if I say yes?" Her lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected the question. Then, she whispered, "You will be bound to me in the eyes of my people. Tonight." Ethan glanced at the king. The ruler's expression was unreadable, but there was no anger, there only interest. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. He turned back to Alira. "Do you want this?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes." The single word settled something inside him. His nerves didn't vanish, but they shifted into a strange, calm certainty. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing. He didn't want to see her return to that lonely gaze she'd worn when he first saw her. Ethan faced the king. "Then, Your Majesty, I will honor your tradition." A wave of murmurs rolled through the hall, growing into applause. The king's lips curved into the faintest smile. "So be it," he declared. "By the vow of lantern light, you are now promised to my daughter, Princess Alira." Ethan barely heard the rest of the words. Alira's hand found his again, her fingers warm against his. "You just changed your life forever," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. Yeah, I think I did. The hall slowly returned to life after the king's declaration, but the mood had shifted. Eyes followed Ethan and Alira wherever they moved. Nobles approached, bowing politely, offering congratulations. Some looked genuinely pleased, others guarded, as if already calculating what this unexpected union might mean. Ethan felt like he was walking through a dream. He hadn't chosen but one that was moving forward whether he liked it or not. When the crowd thinned, Alira guided him toward one of the palace's side corridors. The noise of the celebration faded behind them, replaced by the quiet hum of the glowing wall lights. She stopped near a window that looked out over the city. The lanterns of the streets below floated lazily in the warm night air. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Alira turned to him. I meant what I said earlier, she began softly. If you want to walk away from this, you can. My word will protect you from offense. No one will think less of you. Ethan studied her face. There was no anger in her tone, no pressure, just a strange mixture of hope and resignation. It was as if she had already prepared herself for his refusal. He crossed his arms. If I say no, what happens to you? She hesitated, then looked away. Life continues. My father will keep bringing suitors. I will keep refusing them until one day the council forces my hand, and I will be bound to someone who sees me as a prize, not as a person. The quiet weight of her words sank deep into him. He remembered the way she had stood apart from the crowd earlier, her eyes distant. She had lived her whole life in this palace, surrounded by beauty and power, but never truly free. Ethan leaned on the windowsill, gazing out at the alien skyline. I'm just an engineer, Alira. I don't know how to be a prince, or whatever. I'd be here. She smiled faintly. Do you think I was born knowing how to be a princess? We learn as we live. He chuckled, but the sound quickly faded. This isn't my world. I don't know your customs. I don't know your people. And if I say yes, there's no going back. Her voice softened. Sometimes the most important choices are the ones that don't let us go back. They stood in silence for a moment. Outside, a gentle wind drifted past the window, carrying the faint scent of flowers from the floating gardens. Finally, Ethan turned to face her. When I asked you on that dance floor, I didn't know what it meant. But when you said yes just now, you meant it. Why, Alira's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. Because you listened. Because you didn't see a crown first. Because when I spoke, you answered, as if my words mattered. That is rarer here than you think. Something in his chest tightened. He had spent most of his life fixing machines, solving problems with tools and logic. But this wasn't something he could repair with a wrench. This was a choice that had to be made with his heart. He thought about returning to his ship, to the quiet hum of the engine room, to a life that was safe, familiar, and predictable. And he thought about staying, about waking up in a place where the sky glowed gold, where the gardens floated above the streets, where a woman with violet eyes waited for him. The two futures stood before him like doors. Ethan drew a slow breath. If I stay, if I go through with this, it's not because of your crown. It's because I don't want to see you go back to that lonely look you had when I first saw you. Her lips curved into a real smile, this time warm, alive. Then stay. He nodded once. All right, I'm in. Alira stepped closer, her hand finding his. Her fingers were cool, but steady, as if she had been waiting for this moment. You've just changed your life forever, she said again, but this time there was no warning in her voice, only gratitude. Ethan squeezed her hand. Yeah, and maybe that's exactly what I needed. Somewhere deep in the palace, the music rose again, calling them back to the celebration. But for the first time that night, Ethan didn't feel like a guest. He felt like he belonged. By Varelian law, the dance beneath the wedding lanterns had already bound them, But the king declared that such a union deserved a proper ceremony. The announcement was made before the night's celebration had even ended, and by morning, the entire palace was in motion. Ethan woke to the sound of voices in the corridor outside his guest chamber. Servants hurried past carrying long bolts of shimmering fabric, trays of bright flowers, and baskets of glowing stones that pulsed like slow heartbeats. The air smelled of sweet spice and fresh blossoms. It hit him all at once this was happening. Today. A young attendant entered his room with a respectful bow. "The royal tailor is ready for your fitting, my lord." Ethan almost laughed at the title. "I'm not a lord." The attendant simply smiled. "You will be, before the day ends." He was led to a tall, bright room, where robes of silver and deep blue hung along the walls. The tailor, a thin man with sharp eyes and gentle hands, circled him like an artist inspecting a blank canvas. Fabric was draped across his shoulders, pinned, and adjusted, until Ethan stood wearing a robe that shimmered like starlight on water when he caught his reflection. He barely recognized himself. He looked taller somehow, steadier, like someone who belonged in the halls of a palace. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, Alira was being prepared as well. She stood before a great mirror, while two women braided her hair and threaded it with tiny jewels that glowed with a soft inner light. Her gown was a flowing river of silver and pale gold, and at her throat she wore a single blue crystal, the royal stone of Varelia. But even with all the beauty surrounding her, it was the quiet smile on her face that caught her attendant's eyes. One of them, an older woman who had served the royal family for decades, spoke gently. "You seem different today, princess. Happier." Alira met her gaze in the mirror. "I am." The ceremony was set in the Garden of Veils, a wide-open space high above the city. Curtains of translucent silk swayed in the warm wind, and hundreds of flowers floated in the air, held aloft by tiny, invisible threads of energy. The city stretched out below, golden under the afternoon sun. Ethan stood at the far end of the garden, the king at his side. Guests filled the space, their robes rippling like waves. When the music began, a slow, deep hum that seemed to come from the earth itself, Lyra appeared. She walked between the veils, her gown catching the light in a way that made her seem almost unreal. Every step was graceful, steady, her gaze fixed on him. Ethan's breath caught. For a moment, the noise, the people, the whole alien world around them faded away. There was only her. When she reached him, the king stepped forward. In his hands was a silver thread, thin but impossibly strong. "This thread," he said, "binds not the bodies, but the lives of those who take it." Alira offered her hand. Ethan did the same. The king looped the thread around their wrists, tying them together with 3 careful knots. "With this bond," the king continued, "you are not 2 paths, but 1. You will walk together in light and shadow, in peace and in trial. You will speak truth to one another, stand for one another, and remember always the moment you chose to join." When the final knot was tied, the thread dissolved into a soft shimmer of light that sank into their skin. The crowd broke into applause, the sound rising into the golden air. As the guests began to celebrate, Alira leaned closer. "Do you realize," she whispered, "that you came here as a guest and will leave as part of a royal family?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I'm starting to." She tilted her head, her eyes warm. "And do you regret it?" He shook his head. "Not even a little." For the rest of the day, they moved through the garden together, accepting congratulations, sharing quiet moments between the formalities. And though Ethan still didn't know all the rules of this strange new world, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He didn't feel like an outsider anymore. He was exactly where he was meant to be. If you'd like, I can now make part 7, in the same 700-word style, giving a heartfelt conclusion that shows Ethan and Alira settling into their new life and sealing the emotional impact of the story. This would wrap the whole arc with a powerful HFY ending. The celebrations had ended hours ago, but the palace was still alive with the soft hum of music and laughter drifting through the halls. Ethan stood on the balcony outside his new chambers, looking out over Varelia's glowing city. The air was warm, carrying the scent of flowers from the gardens below. It felt unreal. Just days ago, he had been a visitor from another world, invited to witness a royal wedding, nothing more. Now he was part of that wedding. Now he was a husband. Inside, Alira removed the last of the jewels from her hair, letting it fall loose over her shoulders. She stepped onto the balcony beside him, the moonlight wrapping her in silver. For a moment, they didn't speak. They simply stood together, the quiet between them comfortable, like a shared breath. "You're far from home," she said softly. Ethan gave a small smile. "Maybe, but it doesn't feel that way anymore." She looked at him, her eyes searching. "And if the day comes when you miss your world," he met her gaze, "then we'll go there, together." The days that followed were filled with change. Ethan was introduced to the council, shown the deep archives of the palace, and taught the customs of Varelia. Some nobles were warm and welcoming, others more cautious, curious about this human who had joined their royal line without warning. Ethan didn't try to be something he wasn't. He spoke honestly, listened carefully, and when he didn't understand a tradition, he asked. It surprised many of them, this openness, this lack of pride. Slowly, their guarded expressions softened. Alira was always near, guiding him when needed, standing beside him when court politics turned sharp. Together, they began to find their rhythm, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in the delicate dance of palace life. One evening, they attended a council meeting where two provinces argued over water rights. The discussion was tense, the words sharp. Alira whispered, "This has been unresolved for 3 years." Ethan listened, then asked a simple question neither side had considered. Why not build shared reservoirs in the border region? The idea was met with surprise. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it opened a path forward. By the end of the night, both provinces had agreed to try. As they left the chamber, Alira smiled at him. "You may be new to this world," she said, "but you've already changed it." Weeks passed, and the people of Varelia began to know his face. Market vendors greeted him warmly. Children whispered and pointed, and once, an old woman placed a small flower in his hand for luck. But it wasn't just the people who were changing, it was Ethan. He found himself walking the palace halls with a quiet confidence. He spoke the language more easily now, and when he caught sight of his reflection in the polished walls, he no longer saw just a man out of place, he saw someone who belonged here. One night, under the glow of 100 lanterns, Ethan and Alira returned to the Garden of Veils, the place where it had all begun. The silken curtains swayed in the wind, just as they had on that first night. "It's strange," Ethan said quietly. "I came here for a wedding. I didn't know it would be mine." Alira stepped closer, her voice warm. "Perhaps it wasn't chance. Perhaps this was always waiting for you." He laughed softly. "You believe in fate?" She took his hand. "I believe in choices. You could have left that night. You didn't." They stood together, looking out over the city, the lights below like scattered stars. As the night deepened, Ethan realized something. This wasn't just a chapter in his life. It wasn't an adventure that would end when he returned to Earth. This was his life now. He thought of the strange journey that had brought him here, of the music and the dancing, of the silver thread dissolving into their skin, and he felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. The universe was wide, filled with endless worlds and unknown paths. But in this moment, in this place, with her hand in his, Ethan knew he had already found the one path he wanted to walk, forever.